Welcome, everyone, to another edition of SCRC's Let's Talk Caregiving podcast. I'm your host, Roberto Velasquez, Executive Director of SCRC, and I'm here as always with my co-host, Marta Rañón, Director of Public Relations and Government Affairs.
Hi, Roberto.
Hello. Today we have a special guest, retired Chief of Police, Manuel Rodriguez, who has served as a law enforcement officer for over 32 years and most recently retired as Chief of Police with the National City Police Department.
Well, hi, Roberto. Hi, Marta. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us.
You know, we're really thrilled that you're here today, Chief Rodriguez, because we want to talk about driving and dementia, public safety, and the impact that driving and dementia has on being a family caregiver. So I know that you, from that law enforcement background, you come with some stories and some experiences and maybe some ideas and suggestions that we might be able to share with the community of families. Marta, I know that from the standpoint of when we're working with family caregivers, and you teach actually a driving and dementia class, that we have a lot of questions from people, families who are concerned about their loved ones.
You know, I hear a lot during the classes that from caregivers who say, well, I don't want to be the one to limit my dad from driving. You know, he's the one that taught me how to drive. I learned from him, and for me to take away his license, I just can't do that. So there's definitely a struggle for caregivers to come to that realization. When is it that I should take away the license or that ability and that privilege to drive?
And to do that is again, also the other side of it is the logistical piece, the setting up of transportation. I mean, all of a sudden, this person who's driven all their life is maybe no longer able to drive. And you as a caregiver now have to take on that responsibility or maybe help coordinate that responsibility. And that's a daunting challenge.
Yes. Also, it's if the family is not having the support that they need, there's also a lot of struggle with family dynamics and not being able to get that support from another individual to take away dad's keys. I don't know if you have anything, Chief Rodriguez.
I think the biggest thing is, you know, when you look at it from a public safety perspective, one of the things that the police kind of has changed the language is accidents. We look at things as collisions, no longer accidents, because most collisions are caused by somebody's error. And the reality of it is that somebody that may have dementia, okay, is a risk to everybody in general.
Absolutely.
And not only to themselves, but certainly to the community as a whole. And I think that's really the bigger perspective. And a lot of times, I think that relatives need to understand that.
Yes.
And that it's important for them to have that conversation with folks, especially their loved ones, if they're getting into those stages. And to have that conversation and say, you know, when you can't drive anymore, well, how would you like to handle that?
I'm so glad that you said that because we oftentimes tell our caregivers planning. Let's talk about these issues before you get to that point. And there are some warning signs. There are some indicators that families could be aware of so that if they start seeing this in their loved one, then maybe it's time to step in.
Especially, physical signs. Like, for example, the car's got dings.
Yes.
A lot more dings around the bumper areas and the door areas than normally. The rules of the road, we've heard rules of the road, and I say with quotations, don't apply anymore, or they're not really following them anymore. I mean, there's probably countless examples of when you can tell somebody might not be able to drive anymore.
Well, I think a lot of times when people are confused of where they're going, you're not just lost, but confused. I think that we both know the difference. But I think the one that most people can relate to is, in fact, when you hear these stories about, in a shopping center or at a store where somebody has run into the store or into a building. And a lot of times what we find is some of these folks have gotten confused about which pedal is which. I think that's a big example there. And that's a big red flag as well, that person probably shouldn't be driving. Now, a lot of times when police come across folks that are in these kinds of collisions, we send notice to the Department of Motor Vehicles for re-examination. And that's often an opportunity for these folks to find alternative transportation, but also to make our roads safer. Because eventually that's what we're really talking about. It's not just the individual, but really the safety of the community as a whole.
And actually, we do mention the Department of Motor Vehicles in our classes because oftentimes caregivers say, well, I don't want to be the one to have to step in and take on this responsibility. But by putting the responsibility, let's say, on the Department of Motor Vehicles, hey, Dad, now you have to go get this examination. And then it's them saying, no, you cannot drive anymore. It's not the caregiver. So it kind of takes away that responsibility from the caregiver.
Also with physicians, too.
Yes.
There's a requirement, mandated requirement, physicians, whenever there's a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia, physicians are required to submit a report to the Department of Motor Vehicles. And my understanding, and I'm not exactly sure, I've never worked for the Department of Motor Vehicles, but my understanding is that they do a kind of a computer search to make sure that person is licensed, and then they look at their record history, driving record. Then they will send them a letter and saying, you have to come in for an examination. Driving test and examination.
Right. So there is a process that the DMV follows, I think, for anybody that may be a risk to the general public with their driving abilities. And I think it's very important that all caregivers be aware of this, because it's not, we're talking about dementia today, but it also applies to people that are having seizures or those kinds of things.
Right.
And it's important for, them to be aware of that, because I think the Department of Motor Vehicles does have, the ability to revoke people's driver's license.
Yeah.
But I think, and I think one of the things that Martha mentioned, I think is always important, is really about, prevention, being proactive, seeing these things ahead of time, because they're much easier to deal with if you see them ahead of time rather than after somebody's been in a collision and gotten injured or has injured others, because then everybody feels bad besides everybody getting, physically hurt. So I think that's a big part of this.
And I really appreciate you saying that, as Martha said earlier, that whole planning and talking with the individual. To me, driving, it's important. Not only because I need to get around and drive here and there, but I've been driving since I was 17 years old. And all of a sudden somebody say, you can't drive anymore. That's devastating. It's almost like that was my independence. That was
my life.
That was like everything to me, and it continues to be. And I totally rely on my ability to drive and have a valid driver's license. So it is a very sensitive and maybe sometimes even contentious conversation to have. But it's important to have that conversation, maybe even as when you're having those conversations about advanced directives and powers of attorney, and to bring up, as you said, Chief Rodriguez, related to talk about what are we going to do? How let's figure out what we're going to do when you're no longer able to drive. Yes. Those are great conversations. I know sometimes people who are having memory loss, they're actually kind of relieved that they're having these conversations. Not everybody, but sometimes just beginning that conversation, especially early on, it's kind of a relief because somebody else is going to help them.
I actually know of a story of a caregiver who said that her dad was getting to a point where he was having trouble walking up and down the stairs, but he had still a valid driver's license and his car was in the driveway. And he actually came to his own realization and conclusion that maybe I shouldn't be driving. So he made the decision to sell the car because he said, if it's not there, then I don't have to think about it. And it's not an issue anymore. And the family was kind of shocked that he was saying this because, like you said, he probably had been driving for a long time. And now he was getting to a point where he was doubting his own abilities. So that is a great example of saying, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I probably shouldn't because it's a safety issue. Can somebody else step in and help me with resources or coordinating schedules or figuring out how I can get around?
Right.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that people can do is start breaking these folks into using or breaking their habits or starting a new habit of like ride sharing, services, because I think that's a great alternative that we didn't have years ago. I certainly find it convenient when I go normally to another city, I don't rent a car anymore. Most of the time I'm using a rideshare program because I find it easier. I'm unfamiliar with the city anyway, so it makes it much easier for me to just get Uber I went to Disney World a couple years ago, and I figured out the cost, and it would have cost me more to rent a car and pay for parking than it did to use Uber every time I needed to go there.
kidding.
Yes.
And
Good tip.
Yes. And I think it's important for people to understand that. And I think as we get, as people get less, their abilities to drive lessens, then I think it's important for them to find alternatives. And if we can ease them into that, my mother uses Uber all the time to go grocery shopping and those kinds of things because she doesn't drive. And, once you set up the app, she finds it very convenient. And because it's all it is hitting where you're at and where you're going, and you're pretty much
pick
there.
You up.
Right.
Yes.
And it's so interesting because in my family, when my father passed away, my mom didn't drive anymore. She refused to use outside services. She says, I have 5 adult kids and they all live in the area. You're going to take me around. And we all agreed because we didn't want her to try to drive again, even though she actually did not have dementia, but she had not driven for 20 years because my dad drove her around after he retired. So that was always that was something that the family now had to coordinate. So when we talk about coordinating transportation, it's not just public transportation or other services, which sometimes you need to rely on, and it's hard to find all the in everywhere in the county, but a lot of time it's coordination and agreement within the families.
What we say during our classes is, when we're talking about this topic, is really reducing the need to drive. If there is a way that you can coordinate with other family members, maybe other friends and neighbors, church groups and other senior centers where they can perhaps schedule a bus or a pickup so that then there isn't that need. Hey, I have to go to the grocery store. Mom, do you want me to just pick you up? I'm heading there anyway. Or the neighbor saying, hey, I'm going down the street. Do you need anything? Do you want to come with? So it's really kind of exploring outside of the car option.
And I think everything's traditional. Now we have services that almost deliver everything.
Yes.
Groceries, food. We were talking earlier about, deliveries of McDonald's. One of my coworkers had said that during Christmas, she and her son got up and they didn't feel like going to McDonald's, so they called one of the services and they delivered it to their house, right? They didn't have to even get out of their pajamas. So I think, those are, it's one of the alternatives that, people can really look at and start, getting people used to it. I think as we move forward, those alternatives really help people, that maybe are limited in their mobility to get out because they don't have a car or can't drive. And I think that the world is changing enough that if we start getting our elders, used to these kinds of services, I think it can benefit not only them, but the family as well.
And, you touch on something that I think it's so important. We know that the face of the caregiver, the demographics are changing, that it is the working caregiver who is having to care for their elderly parents as well as their younger kids. So if you're working as a caregiver and you have to take your car to go to work and then later on pick up the kids and take them to soccer or whatever, then this reliance on alternative transportation is greater because somebody has to take mom or dad to where they need to go, appointments, doctor's appointments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think bottom line for all of this is the concern for public safety.
Yes.
Because even though the individual with maybe the dementia is maybe resistant, that we still have to be concerned about them either injuring themselves or other people. God forbid they go run a stop sign or a traffic light and they hit a crosswalk with a bunch of children or just anybody, and those are the kinds of things that you have to think about when making that tough decision as to whether or not you're even going to submit a report to the Department of Motor Vehicles about the concerns that you have. You have to go beyond that and do what's right.
And I think that's an excellent point. I think that when we look at things like it's almost why police officers work and the work that they do. It's intrinsic. It's for the community good, for the public good. And I think once you put that perspective in front of you, because I don't think anybody would feel worse than somebody knowing that something is not right, and then somebody gets injured as a result of that. I think that's really the big point here is, we want to keep everybody safe. We want to keep our drivers safe, and we want to keep our family safe. And that's inclusive of everybody in our communities.
Right.
Now, I know that sometimes it's really challenging based on the condition of the person that a caregiver, is caring for. And sometimes it's not easy. It's not easy to have that conversation, maybe because the person is not aware. They might have dementia, some sort of Alzheimer's stage, end stage or higher levels of dementia. So when persuasion fails, there are some tricks that we talk about during the classes. And I don't know if this is something that maybe you are familiar with, but the easiest one is hiding the keys.
Yep. Yes.
And it's not easy because then where are my keys? Where are my keys? But what we tell caregivers is, so you hide the keys because now you're concerned, right? You're seeing the dings in the car. You talk about the public safety, and all of a sudden you realize, that's dad. He should not be driving, but he doesn't want to listen. So how do we do this? So let's hide the keys. That's not going to go over well. So what do we do now? So by taking away that option, you know what? I can't find the keys. I'll just take you. I have mine right here. Just come with me. We'll look for them later. And just kind of keep stalling and kind of redirecting until it gets to a point that, well, you know what? I might as well take you because who knows where the keys are.
Right. And I've heard examples from other family caregivers where they've somehow removed some plugs or something out of the engine so that it cannot start. And then they use that same tactic. Well, the car's not working, let's just go in my car. And then they get in and they drive away. I mean, there's little things that people do because sometimes, as Martha was saying, the individual, even though they have their license removed, even though they have severe dementia, in their mind, I'm going to drive.
Absolutely. And I think, the simplest thing is usually to remove a battery cable in the car. And why that's probably more effective than hiding the keys is they may be able to find the keys, and then that would be a problem. So
hide the keys and remove the cable.
The cable, because then you can say, oh, the car's not working. We'll have to take it into the garage. We'll have to call a tow truck. And I think calling a tow truck is like a major thing for a lot of people. So that's going to take some time. And I think regardless of, your situation, I think you understand, okay, well, it's going to take a while to get the car fixed.
Yeah.
And so I agree, when we have these conversations and people aren't agreeable and they're in such a stage that they may pose a threat to the rest of the community, then I think it's important that, people be proactive and use some of these tactics to really help them, help the individual with dementia.
What I encourage caregivers is to try to get as many resources, learn about them as much as possible. We talked about DMV, we talked about what law enforcement, does, but also visiting our website for some of these classes. I mean, we have our list of live stream classes where we talk about more in depth how to engage someone who wants to keep driving, perhaps they shouldn't.
Right, absolutely. And you know what, and you're so right in that, Martha. If people contact Southern Caregiver Resource Center, they ask to speak to somebody about their situation, they become a client of ours. They work with the family consultants who can work with them on a care plan, and the care plan could include transportation needs or diagnosis so that you can get the physician to make that report. Or the even other tactics, as you're saying, where the family can also submit a report to the Department of Motor Vehicles themselves. A lot of the little things that you can do that people are not very familiar with, but a good place to start is to call Southern Caregiver Resource Center.
Yes, we're here.
We're here.
Well, and I think people need that. So thank you for being here for everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you both. Well, that's all the time we have left for this edition of Let's Talk Caregiving. I want to thank Martha for co-hosting and sharing her stories for another stimulating discussion about caregiving, and our guest, Chief Rodriguez, and all your wisdom from all your years of law enforcement. I also want to remind our audience that if you are providing support to a loved one, you don't have to do this alone. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. Just go to our website at scrc.care or call us at 1-800-827 1008. Also want to remind everybody to follow us on Facebook for more podcasts. SCRC is a nonprofit organization. We provide services due to the generosity to our donors and community partners. If you want to make a tax-deductible donation, please go to our website and click on the Donate tab. I also wanted to just mention really, really quickly, we have a really exciting event coming up, a caregiver play.
Yes, it's actually scheduled for November 4th of this year at Signet Theater in Old Town. And we are so excited to be able to bring this to the community because we're going to premiere 2 original plays which explore the many faces of caregiving. So the audience will get to see these 2 takes on caregiving with all the challenges that caregiving can bring, but also have an opportunity to talk about it at the end. So we'll have our clinical staff there. We'll be there to really go in depth of what it is to be a caregiver, as well as have resources. So we encourage people to buy your tickets, $25, and you can visit our website, scrc.care, for more information.
Excellent. I'm really excited about that. And remember, SCRC is here for you.
Caring for those who care for others.
Thank you.